For 20 years I paid for the Christmas party that everyone claimed I ruined. But this year I let them pay the bill themselves. And you will not believe the look on my son-in-law's face when he saw the total. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. My name is Paul Chandler, 69 years old. I spent my life trying to do everything right to make my family happy, only to be repaid with endless ingratitude. Let me tell you about this pain and how I finally dealt with it. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can begin this story and hit subscribe. I believe you're going to enjoy this one. I was sitting on the spare wooden chair beside the kitchen door. That was my usual spot. The chair did not belong at the main dining table. It sat outside the circle of warmth. From that corner I could see the entire living room. My daughter Diane stood in the center. She held a gold-plated clipboard in her hands. She flipped through each page like a factory foreman inspecting the floor. She barked orders at everyone in a sharp, cutting voice. She never even looked up at me when she told me to move the stack of cardboard boxes into the backyard. I stood up and did as I was told. Not a single complaint. My son-in-law Greg stood with his hands on his hips beside the fireplace. He was wearing the expensive sweater that my money had bought him for his birthday last year. Greg looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. He shook his head at the neighbor standing beside him. He spoke quietly but loudly enough for his words to reach my ears. There goes the old man ruining everything again. Every year he destroys the mood. Diane heard him. She said nothing. She simply gave Greg a small nod of agreement. That silence landed across my face like a clean, stinging slap. They thought I was a burden. They thought I was an eccentric old man who loved interfering with other people's happiness. Every word I spoke was dismissed as outdated. Every action I took was treated as an annoyance. But they forgot one critically important fact. The elegant banquet hall they were planning to decorate did not open its doors by itself. The gourmet food did not magically appear on the tables. The band did not play beautiful Christmas music on its own. Every bit of it ran on one single source of power: my signature on the checks. They needed my money, but they despised my presence. They wanted a magazine-perfect Christmas, but they wanted to push this old father into the shadows. For years I accepted the role of the fool. I spent money just to watch my children gather together. I spent money to buy myself a seat in the corner of the kitchen. I thought that was simply the price of growing old. I was wrong. That was not filial devotion. It was organized exploitation. My kindness had become something they took for granted. My patience had fed the greed and arrogance of the daughter I once carried in my arms. I looked at the old leather wallet lying on the kitchen table. It was as empty as my relationship with my children. But my bank account was not. It held the rewards of an entire lifetime of hard work. And it was about to stop serving their ingratitude. The phone in my pocket vibrated softly. The familiar chime of a bank notification shattered the silence inside the car. I pulled over to the side of the road. The transaction alert appeared on my screen. Exactly $3,200 had just been deducted from my account. It was the deposit for the main banquet hall at the downtown hotel. I had signed that check at 5 o'clock that morning. At that hour, the entire house was still wrapped in darkness. My children were fast asleep beneath their warm blankets. I had to do it in secret like a thief. I had to sign the check before they woke up just to avoid the complaining. I stared at the $3,200 displayed on the screen. Diane's words from the night before still echoed in my mind. As she flipped through her clipboard, she reminded me in an icy voice, "Dad, remember not to say anything like you did last year." She was afraid I would embarrass Greg in front of his friends. She was afraid my old-fashioned stories would lower the value of the party. She had no idea that without this old man who talked too much, that banquet hall would not even open its doors to welcome them. I let out a laugh inside the car. It was a bitter laugh. I realized a painful truth about myself. I was spending money to buy tolerance. I was paying thousands of dollars just to feel like I was still needed. I was afraid of the loneliness that comes with old age. I was afraid of being pushed to the sidelines of my own family. So I turned myself into an ATM. I thought quietly paying every bill would make my children appreciate me. I thought this generosity would earn me at least a little respect. But I had been completely wrong. When you are always willing to pay, people begin to think it is your responsibility. When you stay silent in the face of insults, people take it as acceptance. Diane and Greg had become far too comfortable spending my money. They treated that $3,200 check as something they were simply entitled to. They used my money to build the image of their own success. Yet they were ashamed of the very man who had given them that money. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and pressed the accelerator. The car rolled toward home in complete silence. I had turned off the radio. I did not want to hear a single sound at that moment. I needed the quiet to see everything clearly. 20 years of endurance had not brought me love. It had only nourished ungrateful parasites living under my own roof. The $3,200 check I signed that morning would be the last check I ever signed for this charade. I turned onto the driveway leading to the backyard. I saw Greg and Diane standing on the patio talking to someone. I stepped out of the car with an entirely different mindset. I was no longer the pitiful old father, desperately trying to please his children. I was carrying a secret worth $3,200. And I knew with absolute certainty that the first cracks had already begun to appear in their perfect facade even though they had no idea. But I never imagined that right there in that corner of the backyard I would accidentally overhear another secret one far more horrifying from the mouths of my own children. I stood frozen beside my car. The laughter drifting from the patio rang in my ears like nails on a chalkboard. I did not walk over right away. Instead, my mind drifted back through the memories of the past 20 years. For 2 decades, I had grown accustomed to cleaning up the messes my children created. But the most painful part was that I was always the one who got blamed. I remember the Christmas ham disaster 2 years ago as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Diane forgot to turn the oven on at the right time. By the time the guests arrived, the ham was still raw. She immediately turned toward me in front of everyone. She said it was my fault because I kept bustling around the kitchen and distracted her. I quietly accepted the blame to save my daughter's dignity. Then there was the year I casually mentioned how hard life had been when Diane was growing up. Greg shot me a furious glare. He accused me of tarnishing the family's elegant image in front of his business associates. But the worst part of the script always came the next morning after the party had ended and everyone had gone home. My phone would ring. Diane's voice would suddenly become unbelievably sweet. She would always begin with the same words. "Dad, we had a few unexpected expenses last night." Or the catering company charged us extra because the party ran longer than expected. Then she would say, "Dad, could you smooth things over for us?" And I would pull out my wallet once again. I would sign another check to smooth things over for them. I paid every unexpected bill without asking a single question. I believed I was protecting my children. I believed it was a father's contribution to preserving his family's happiness. My kindness had been turned into the perfect tool for emotional manipulation. They knew my greatest weakness was seeing my children upset. They knew I was willing to spend money in exchange for an illusion of peace. I stood beside the cooling hood of my car. The resentment that had built up over the years felt like water filling a glass that was about to overflow. I had endured this injustice for far too long. I kept lying to myself that someday they would finally understand my heart. But they never did. My patience only made them greedier. My generosity only turned me into a fool in my children's eyes. I took a deep breath to steady myself. I opened the trunk and lifted out 4 metal folding chairs. I needed to carry them into the backyard just as Diane had ordered. I walked slowly across the green lawn. I deliberately took the long way around the corner so I would not attract anyone's attention. But that single decision to go around the wall led me straight to a naked truth, a truth so cold that it crushed the last remaining shred of hope in a father's heart. I stood tucked behind the brick corner of the patio. The 4 metal folding chairs in my hands suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Their weight seemed to drag my shoulders toward the ground. Just a few steps away beyond a thick hedge, Greg was talking to Harper. Harper was the new neighbor who had moved in at the beginning of the year. He held a beer in his hand and nodded as he listened to my son-in-law. Greg's voice carried clearly through the afternoon air. He let out a laugh filled with contempt. The old man wandered off somewhere early again, probably buying more useless junk so he can take credit for it later. Harper asked curiously, "Why don't you just tell him to stay home and get some rest?" Greg immediately waved a dismissive hand. His voice dripped with sarcasm. "You don't get it. This family can finally breathe when the old man isn't around. Whenever he's here, everything turns into a mess because of his outdated way of thinking. He just loves being the center of attention." I felt my heart tighten. My chest ached with a bitter heaviness. I waited for someone to defend me. I waited for my daughter to stop her husband. Diane was standing right beside Greg. She was arranging glasses on the stone table with her head lowered. She heard every cruel word that came out of his mouth. But she showed no anger. She offered no objection. Diane looked up at Greg and gave him a smile of agreement. Then my daughter's soft giggle filled the air. That laugh drove into my pride like the blade of a knife. This family can finally breathe when I'm not around. The sentence echoed through my mind over and over like the pounding of a hammer. I looked down at my weathered hands. These were the hands that had worked without rest to raise Diane. These were the same hands that had signed a $3,200 check only hours earlier so they could throw a Christmas party worthy of showing off. Yet in their eyes, my absence was a relief. My presence was the burden that spoiled their happiness. A cold chill ran down my spine. 20 years of buried resentment suddenly froze into one firm decision. I no longer felt heartbroken. The pain disappeared, replaced by a terrifying sense of clarity. I realized that everything I had endured until now had been meaningless. I had turned myself into nothing more than a fool for them to walk all over. Quietly, I lowered the 4 folding chairs onto the grass. I set them down as gently as I could without making a sound. I did not want them to know I had overheard everything. I did not want some meaningless argument. They did not deserve an explanation from me. I turned around and walked down the narrow path toward the front gate. I climbed into my car, closed the door, started the engine, and drove away from that house. I did not say a single word to Diane. I never even looked into the rearview mirror. The car carried me into the fading afternoon. My mind was empty, but my heart had already made a monumental decision. I was going to give them the Christmas they wanted. A Christmas completely free of the inconvenience of this old man. But first, there was something I needed to do. I needed to face the cold, undeniable numbers I had spent far too long pretending not to see. Night had fallen deep into silence. My study was completely quiet. The only light came from the blue glow of my laptop screen, casting its pale reflection across my aging face. I sat there without moving. One by one, I opened the folders containing my old bank statements. I began reviewing the transaction history from the past 20 Christmas seasons. Numbers do not lie. They appeared on the screen with unmistakable clarity, precise, emotionless, and cold. Last year's banquet hall decorations and catering had cost $12,000. The year before that, the total had been $15,000. I kept typing, entering every figure into a spreadsheet. The rapid clicking of the keyboard echoed through the darkness like the countdown of a ticking bomb. Then I added the cost of the band, the gifts, and even the clothing Diane had so skillfully persuaded me to pay for. After 3 sleepless hours, I pressed the final calculation button. A staggering number appeared on the laptop screen. The total stole my breath away. It was equal to the value of a small house with the mortgage completely paid off. It was more than enough to fund a luxurious retirement on practically any tropical island in the world. I leaned back in my chair. I stared at the ceiling and laughed to myself. So this was the truth. For 20 years I had poured a fortune into the pockets of people who despised me. I had used my sweat, my tears, and my retirement savings to finance Greg and Diane's arrogance. Then a painful realization settled over me. Paul Chandler, you were never a father they loved. You were nothing more than a wallet with a heartbeat. As long as the wallet stayed full, you earned a seat in the corner of the kitchen. The moment it stopped being useful, your very existence became a mistake. The heartbreak inside me had completely disappeared. In its place came a strange and unexpected sense of peace. Once you know the truth, fear loses its power. I looked at the $3,200 deposit check I had written that morning. Those were the last dollars I would ever spend on this lie. I closed the laptop. The first light of dawn was beginning to appear beyond the window. A new day had arrived. And it was also the day I began taking back control of my own life. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Sharon's contact information, the manager of the downtown hotel's banquet hall. I knew what I was about to do would set off a chain of delayed explosions throughout Diane's family. And I was finally ready to press the detonator. At exactly 8 o'clock that morning, I called Sharon. She was the banquet hall manager at the downtown hotel. She answered after the third ring. Her voice was polite and professional. Good morning, Mr. Chandler. How may I help you? We received your $3,200 deposit check earlier today. I took a deep breath. My voice remained calm but firm. Good morning, Sharon. I'd like to make a few changes to the agreement. I want to cancel the automatic payment authorization from my account for this entire event. Sharon fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, surprise crept into her voice. Are you certain, sir, if the automatic payment is removed, the event could be cancelled unless someone else pays the balance on time? I am certain, I replied without the slightest hesitation. Please remove my name from the paperwork. I'm not pulling the plug on anyone. I'm simply taking my name off the page. From this point forward, send every remaining invoice directly to Diane, Chandler, and Greg. If they want to keep the banquet hall, they'll need to put it in their own names and pay with their own credit cards. Sharon confirmed my request with the professionalism I had always appreciated. She assured me the system would be updated immediately. I ended the call. A feeling of relief spread through my entire body. Then I called the bakery and the event decorating company. I repeated the exact same sentence to each of them. Please remove my name from the paperwork. I am no longer guaranteeing payment for anyone. I sat down at the dining table and poured myself a cup of black coffee. The calm, courteous way I had spoken to those vendors had been the opening shot. Diane and Greg were still lost in the fantasy of the extravagant Christmas party they were planning. They still believed this old man would quietly stand beside the kitchen door and pay for every ounce of their extravagance. They had no idea the financial foundation supporting their entire illusion had just collapsed. I took a sip of coffee. Its bitter taste sharpened my thoughts. I knew Diane would soon receive a notification from the hotel. I knew a storm was about to crash into that little house, but I was no longer the Paul Chandler of 20 years ago. I was no longer afraid of fake tears or baseless accusations. Suddenly, my phone began ringing over and over. The screen displayed 3 capital letters: Diane. My daughter had discovered what I had done. The phone vibrated across the wooden table like an angry beast. I made no move to answer it. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I let it ring again. For once, I wanted her to experience the helplessness I had endured for so many years. My phone screen never had a chance to cool down. After 10 missed calls from Diane, the text messages started pouring in. The notification chime rang over and over. An invisible web of pressure from my relatives closed in around me. The first message came from my cousin Albert. Paul, what are you thinking? How could you do this to your own daughter right before Christmas? The next message was from my cousin Linda. She called me selfish and petty. None of them knew the truth. They had only heard Diane's tearful version of the story. They had turned me into a cruel old man determined to ruin his grandchildren's Christmas. I sat silently in my armchair. My chest tightened. The habit of enduring everything for the past 20 years began creeping back into my mind. It urged me to pick up the phone. It told me to call Sharon and restore the payment authorization. It told me to endure it one more time in exchange for another illusion of peace. My hand trembled slightly as I stared at the harsh accusations from people who shared my blood. I almost collapsed under the weight of that overwhelming pressure. Then a new message appeared. It was from Ruth, my younger sister. Her message was short. Don't you dare give up this time. I know what you've endured for the past 20 years. It's finally time for you to live for yourself. Ruth's words were like a stream of cool water poured over my wavering mind. They gave me the strength I needed to stand firm. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. Silence immediately returned to the room. I chose myself. I chose my self-respect instead of a false sense of peace. If you've made it this far, then this story has probably kept your attention. Please do us one quick favor. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and include the name of your hometown as well. Many people watch without doing it, but it doesn't cost you anything, and it means a great deal to us. The cold winter days passed quickly. Christmas Eve finally arrived. The downtown hotel was preparing to light up for the grand celebration. I knew Diane and Greg had been scrambling everywhere to come up with the money after I removed my name from the contracts. They could not cancel the party without losing face in front of their friends and business associates. They had been forced to use the last credit card they had left to fill the hole my wallet had once covered. I stood before the mirror and tightened my necktie. I put on the finest suit I owned. I did not bring my wallet. I did not bring a single check. I was not going to that party to be the pitiful old father sitting in the corner of the kitchen. I was following Ruth's advice. I was going to be seen. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. My car rolled toward the downtown hotel. I knew an unimaginable scene was waiting for me inside that banquet hall. A scene Diane and Greg could never have dreamed of when they decided to push me into the shadows. The downtown hotel's banquet hall glowed beneath warm golden lights. Soft instrumental Christmas music drifted through the air. The scent of fresh pine and mulled wine filled the spacious room with warmth. Guests gradually filled the elegant tables dressed in their finest attire. Laughter and cheerful conversation echoed throughout the hall. Diane stood at the entrance. She wore an elegant red velvet gown. She forced the brightest smile she could manage as she greeted each arriving guest. But I could see the panic hiding in her eyes. Her shoulders were stiff. She gripped her gold-plated clipboard as though it were a life preserver. Beside her, Greg was busy shaking hands with his business associates. Sweat kept forming on his forehead even though the weather outside was bitterly cold. Their perfect facade was surviving only through sheer determination. At the far corner of the banquet hall, the spare wooden chair beside the kitchen door remained empty. That had been my seat for the past 20 years. This year no one sat there. No one bent down to pick up scraps of paper from the floor. No one quietly checked whether the band had enough water. My absence created an invisible void that weighed heavily over the entire room. The real chaos began behind the scenes. Sharon, the banquet manager, appeared once again. She carried a thick stack of invoices in her hands. She walked straight toward Diane with a serious expression. The patience she usually showed was gone. She lowered her voice, but every word was firm. "Ma'am, Mr. Gregg's credit card has just been declined. We need immediate payment for the band's fees and the additional beverage charges. Otherwise, we'll have no choice but to discontinue those services in 15 minutes. The color drained from Diane's face. She looked around nervously. She hurried Sharon toward a secluded corner to avoid curious eyes from the guests. Stammering, Diane insisted there had to be some mistake before calling Greg over. Greg approached with an ashen face. His hands visibly shook as he pulled another card from his wallet. It was his last credit card. Its limit had already been maxed out. I stood quietly behind the large glass doors near the entrance. I watched the entire scene unfold with complete calm. They were finally paying the price with their own pride. For the first time, they were experiencing the terror of standing alone without a walking wallet behind them. Just as Greg was about to swipe that final credit card in desperation, I decided to step out of the shadows. I walked straight into the center of the banquet hall. Diane and Greg stared at me in stunned disbelief. But my arrival was not the worst thing that would happen to them that night. I walked confidently through the banquet hall. The sound of my dress shoes echoed across the polished marble floor with every step. Walking beside me was Ruth. My sister wore an elegant black suit. Her face was calm, firm, and unwavering. The moment the two of us entered, conversations around the room faded as every eye turned toward us. Diane spotted me immediately. She stormed over, her face burning with anger. Through clenched teeth she hissed, "Dad, why are you even here? Haven't you done enough to hurt us already?" Greg marched over as well. He planted himself in front of me like a wall. "So the old man came to ruin our party after all," he snapped. "Security, get him out of here," Sharon stepped forward without hesitation. She cut Greg off with a firm voice over the handheld microphone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Greg, but you do not have the authority to remove guests from this hotel." The entire banquet hall fell silent. Every guest and business associate turned to watch. Even the Christmas music stopped at that exact moment. Sharon looked directly at Diane and Greg. Her voice carried through every corner of the room. "While everyone's attention is here, I'd like to share an important fact with all of our guests. The man you have called a troublemaker, the man you have pushed aside for the past 20 years, is the only person who paid every single dollar for all of your lavish Christmas parties." She paused before continuing. "Mr. Paul Chandler's $3,200 deposit this morning was the last contribution he will ever make toward this display of ingratitude. Beginning today, our hotel will conduct business only with those who can genuinely afford it." A wave of whispers spread through the ballroom like a swarm of bees. Greg's business associates stared at him with shock and unmistakable contempt. The color drained from Greg's face until it resembled cold ash. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Diane stood frozen. The gold-plated clipboard slipped from her hands and struck the floor with a loud crack. Their carefully constructed image had been exposed in the most humiliating way imaginable. Then Danny, Diane's oldest son, stepped out from the crowd. He came to stand beside Ruth and me. His eyes were red with emotion as he faced his mother. "I've had enough of your lies," he said. "Grandpa sacrificed his whole life. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just to earn a chair in the corner of the kitchen, and you treated him like he was nothing but an annoying old fool." His voice trembled. I'm proud to call him my grandfather, and I'm ashamed to have parents who could be this ungrateful. Ruth stepped forward. She pointed toward the empty chair beside the kitchen door. For 20 years, she said firmly, my brother paid for the privilege of keeping this family together, but all of you treated him like nothing more than a walking wallet. She swept her gaze across the room. Today, that wallet is permanently closed. Pay for your own empty pride. Silence settled over the banquet hall. A perfect, terrifying silence. Not one person spoke in Diane's or Greg's defense. The relatives who had flooded my phone with angry messages now stared down at their dinner plates. My quiet revenge was complete. I never had to shout. I never had to raise a hand. The truth, and the numbers, had torn away their elegant masks all by themselves. I looked at Diane one final time. Tears of humiliation streamed down her face. Without another word, Ruth, Danny, and I turned and walked away together. We left the banquet hall, surrounded by the silent respect of everyone who had witnessed the truth. The hotel doors closed behind us. Christmas night was bitterly cold, but my heart had never felt warmer. I was finally free. I had reclaimed my dignity. Yet Diane's family drama was far from over. A year had passed since that explosive Christmas night at the downtown hotel. The aftermath for Diane and Greg was devastating. The successful image they had worked so hard to project collapsed in full view of everyone. One by one, Greg's business partners walked away, unwilling to associate with someone so openly ungrateful. The enormous credit card debt from the previous year's Christmas party pushed their marriage to the breaking point. The arguments never stopped, and eventually they chose to separate. That was the price of arrogance. And a life built on appearances. This Christmas arrived in peace. My little house glowed with the warm light of simple Christmas decorations. There was no luxurious banquet hall, no extravagant band, no expensive gourmet feast. Our table held only a few simple homemade dishes. Danny and Ruth sat beside the fireplace, laughing and talking together. Then the doorbell rang softly. I walked over and opened the front door. Diane stood on the porch. She wore a simple winter coat. In her hands was a small container of food she had cooked herself. The gold-plated clipboard was gone. So was the commanding attitude she had once worn like armor. She looked at me with eyes filled with sorrow and genuine remorse. She stepped inside and placed the food on the kitchen table. Then she turned toward me. Her voice trembled. I'm sorry it took me so long to truly see you, Dad. I made this myself this year. I don't need your money anymore. She swallowed hard. I just want to sit down and share a meal with you. I looked at my daughter. For the first time in a very long while, I saw genuine sincerity in her eyes after a year of facing the consequences of her own choices. I smiled softly. Then I pulled out the chair beside mine for her. True reconciliation had finally arrived, not through money, but through an awakened conscience. The story of my life taught me a lesson that cost more than I ever imagined. Family is one of life's greatest blessings, but it can survive only when it is built on mutual respect. You cannot buy filial love with money, and you cannot purchase genuine affection by endlessly sacrificing your own dignity. Remember this one truth. You cannot buy respect. You can only buy the privilege of being used. Cherish the people who quietly sacrifice for you, before it is too late. Thank you for joining Dad's Real Life Revenge. Don't forget to share your own story in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next hard-earned lesson. I'll see you in the next video.